Sometimes, when I sit down with Grace to watch a film, she falls asleep halfway through. And I wouldn't mind, but for the fact that when something happens in the film and she wakes up, she always says, "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Didn't mean to. Before we sat down to watch the film, you turn the volume down, turn the lights out, put your pajamas on, lie down on the couch, put your head on a pillow, and put a blanket over you. I think, on reflection, maybe you did mean to.
Life is so fast, isn't it? And it means that often we forget to sit down and reflect on some of the things that have been and the memories that we have. And sometimes when we sit back and we do reflect, we find that things aren't necessarily as we first thought. And actually this now is an opportunity for us to do that, to think back on those times where God has been at work in our lives and maybe we didn't notice it at the time. Maybe God's footprints were already all over our lives and we didn't see it at the time. And so a question for you as we begin to think about what God is doing and has been doing in our lives this morning is, where has God been at work in your life over the past months, over the past years?
That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you're holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now fast spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread.
In the story that we just heard, it was all about two disciples, not two of the 12, just two disciples, two followers of Jesus on the road to Emmaus, walking out of Jerusalem. And they were disappointed. And so they were having a bit of a moan about the fact that Jesus, the person they thought was the Messiah and the Saviour, well, he died. And that seemed to be the end of the story. Until Jesus himself meets them on the road. But they don't recognise him. And that's because God keeps them from recognising him. And so maybe he's disguised, or he doesn't look as he normally would. And so they begin walking with Jesus and moaning about Jesus to Jesus. I mean, that's a tough break, right? But Jesus listens. And he teaches them why what had to happen, happened. He teaches them all about the Old Testament. And then they go and they eat together. They invite Jesus to eat with them. And when he breaks the bread, it's at that point that they recognize who he is. And in that moment, Jesus disappears. Well, the two disciples immediately reflect over the story and think back over the story. And they turn to each other and they say, our hearts were burning when he talked to us and when he shared the Old Testament and everything in there with us. I knew there was something about him. And as a result of that encounter, those two disciples, they changed their path and they're guided right the way back to Jerusalem, where they start to tell everybody about Jesus. When I realised young that I wasn't going to be the footballer that I'd always dreamed of being, it kind of made thinking about the future and what I wanted to be really difficult. I grew up in a Christian home. My mum and dad were both Christians, and one day my dad came home and he said, Tim, I think I'm going to be a vicar. And I was like, a vicar? Who becomes a vicar? It's ridiculous. Anyway, what it meant was that we were going to have to leave our home. My best friend lived next door, and so we used to jump over the wall and we would play football together. It was amazing. And we would have to leave all of that, and we would move to Bootle, and then later on we would move to Kensington. And to be perfectly honest, in those transitions, I found them really difficult. And my faith completely got kind of lost in all of that. During this time, I was on a course at John Moores University, and there was two reasons I've been put onto this course. The first was because my teacher wouldn't recommend me for the course that I actually wanted to do, which I don't really blame her for. And the second was because I researched this kind of course and what I would be doing afterwards, and I knew that it would get me a little bit of money, like it would pay well. And so I thought, well, yeah, why not? And so I ended up making this decision by myself and for myself. And while, I did enjoy university life, I didn't enjoy the lectures. The course was called Building Design and Technology Management. In short, that was project management. And if I'm completely honest, at every opportunity in the lectures, I would sign in and then I would sneak out the back and go and spend my student loan on trainers. But the final straw for me came when I had to sit through a 4-hour lecture on how bricks are made. Surely that isn't for me. At this point, I was really not sure about what to do with my future until I saw a journalism course, which is kind of what I actually wanted to do originally, and I jumped onto that. And for a while, I was really set on becoming a journalist until there was one moment where I realised that it would mean putting headlines before people, and that was something I really struggled with. And so I began to think, well, actually maybe this isn't for me, and even the opportunity that I got towards the end of the local paper, I turned down and I thought, no, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And it all just felt a bit bizarre at the time, like I thought that was exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Why was I jumping between different things? It didn't really make any sense. At this point, I wouldn't have called myself a Christian, but I would have still said that there was a God. I just felt like we'd kind of forgotten about each other. And then I ended up in this job at a place called White Kids. A role as a press officer came up, and it was a short-term thing, but I thought, you know what, that sounds much more like me. It was a charity. They're all about bringing hope to a community that really, really needs it. And they were passionate about what they wanted to do. And it was an amazing few years. And in short, to be perfectly honest, it was the people there that really helped me to rediscover my faith, who I am supposed to be. But also I found that I could use a lot of the gifts that I'd kind of been building up over that time, and I can use them now too. They've been preparing me for this now. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. You see, at the time, I didn't really understand what was going on. But as I look back, I can see that God sort of redirected my path. His fingerprints, his footprints are all over that part of my life as he redirected me to who he wanted me to be and to become. And as a result of all of those different things, I'm able to use those skills now that I learned during that time for the job I do now and for the job I did at Y Kids. It really all sort of clicked together. So when you think back over your life, over the last few months or last few years or whatever it's been, where's God been at work in your life that maybe we didn't recognize at first? Maybe when we were in it, we didn't see it. But where has God been at work in your life? In Exodus 33, similar to these two disciples, Moses has an encounter with God where he asks to see the glory of God. And God says, you can't look at me directly, but I'll allow you to see the back of me. There are some that would translate this as where I just was. And so in order for Moses to see the glory of God, the best way for him to do that is to show him where he has just been and what he has just done. And so by disguising himself, maybe we benefited because we were able to see the glory of God in our lives. Where has he just been? What has he just done in your life? And yet when we forget to reflect on the things that God has done in our lives, the times where he's shown the glory and the glimpses of glory in our lives that have guided us and got us to where we are today, I think we end up a little bit like these two disciples, walking on the road to Emmaus, starting to complain about the things that God isn't doing in our lives at the moment that we want him to do, starting to moan to each other, starting to lose hope, starting to lack the faith that we need, starting to stop believing in the resurrection power. The reality of our lives, the state of our lives hits us hard. The grief, the worry, the hurt, whatever it's been. We pray for the certain things that we want. We ask God for certain things and maybe he doesn't reply exactly as we wanted, or that miracle that we needed, it doesn't quite happen. And so as a result, in our heads, we're asking God for this intervention, but in our hearts, we begin the walk to Emmaus. You see, the thing that changes the path of these two disciples isn't complicated, but it's amazing. And it's simply the broken body of Jesus beating death. It's an encounter with a living God who's chose to walk and to listen and to share love with each of them. And in turn, what it's meant is that they're drawn back towards the cross and drawn back to who it is they're supposed to be. There is a famous quote, and it's this: life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. What hope and glory from the past that God's done in your life can you take into these next few weeks? So let's take a moment now, shall we? Just to reflect, just to bring to mind some of those things, the times where God has guided us, the things that he's done in our lives. The times where maybe he's come in disguise. Maybe it's not as you expected it. Maybe when you look back now, you think, actually, yeah, maybe that was God doing his thing. And I would love to encourage you this afternoon to, maybe with the people that you are sitting with at dinner, to go around and maybe say something that you're thankful for that God has been doing in your life. Maybe to write something in your journal. Maybe to write down something on your phone, in your notes, however you would normally do it. But to remember the things that you are thankful for in the times where God has guided you in life. So let's just take a moment now to pray. Father God, we thank you so much that we all matter to you. We thank you for the times that you have guided us, redirected us, even if it was in disguise, even if it was in a way that we didn't see at the time, even if we didn't understand. We thank you for the way that your hand and your footprints and your fingerprints are all over our lives, and for the glory that shines through each and every one of us. Help us to remember those things, bring them to mind, and for it to set us up for this next few weeks as a thankful people for what it is that you're doing. Lord, would you grow our faith in this time? Help us to stay away from that walk to Emmaus and to stay at the foot of the cross, where there is hope, where there is peace. Amen. I encourage you to stay in that moment and let the Spirit speak to you as we put on the next video. We've put together our own version of the Footprints poem.